Hi, welcome to our presentation on the Asiana Flight 214 crash that happened at San Francisco International Airport. I'm Christine Taylor.
And I'm Molly Ferris. So just a little bit of an overview first. So this incident happened on July 6, 2013 at 11:28 a.m. A Boeing 777 was on its way into the airport to land, and it was actually coming in too steep and too slow. And it struck the seawall on approach to the airport. And this image here just gives you a little depiction of the actual crash. So as you can see, the airplane was coming in very steep. It was coming in too slow. And it actually, at crash stage 1, the tail clips the seawall at 106 knots at impact. And then it actually hit so hard that it broke the tail fuselage off. The landing gear also fell off, and it whipped back so forcefully that it actually did a 360 and then landed and skids to a halt where passengers start to exit the plane. Pretty crazy. A little bit of an overview for the county and where this happened. So it occurred in San Mateo County. The population is just over 700,000, which is the 14th most populous county in California. And it covers roughly 450 square miles. And this map over here that shows where the airport is with the airplane, and just above this picture is where San Francisco is, just to give you a little bit of a reference. So here's some images after the crash. The bottom left-handed picture is actually right after the crash. You can see here that a couple chutes did deploy, and there's smoke rising from it. And even more interesting, there's this guy with his luggage. I don't think after I broke off part of the plane and did a 360, the first thing on my mind would be to get my luggage, but a lot of people actually did. A lot of people grabbed their luggage, then grabbed their babies, and then exited the plane. And actually after everyone safely exited, the combination of jet fuel and everything happening, it actually did break out into a amazing fire and did this damage, some significant damage to the aircraft. So there were 291 passengers. This includes the flight attendants, pilots, staff, and everyone total. Out of that, 3 died. 2 actually died because of at the site, and then 1 actually later in the hospital. So out of those passengers, 40 of them, 8 flight attendants and 1 flight crew member received serious injuries, and then the rest, 248 passengers, 4 flight attendants, and 3 flight crew members received minor injuries or were not injured at all, which is pretty amazing. And the debris spread over 9 football fields, so this crash was a very large site. A little bit of the response assessment. So to give you a little bit of a timeline, at 11:28 was the actual plane crash. 11:29, the tower called 911. At 11:30, the first ambulance was on scene. And then less than 2 hours later, the tarmac was completely cleared, which is pretty amazing. And then at 4:40, the last patient left the airport. So in total, 178 patients were transported to 11 Bay Area hospitals within 5 hours. So we really felt like this was an amazing response timeline to have 911 called so quickly and the first ambulance on scene so quickly. We really felt like this expedited the process and really saved a lot of lives.
So just to talk a little bit about that response at the crash site. So in fire and rescue, there is a common triage tool that is used, and that tool is shown here. And they're able to assess the injured very quickly and give them a code color and put that tag with that patient with the injuries marked on there. So when they get to the hospital, there's been a basic assessment, and then they transport according to those colors. So if it's a red, they send them immediately to the hospital, or if it's a green, they'll hold them there until they get all those red people taken care of and off to the hospital. So that's really speaks to how quickly the response happened and immediately getting that were injured getting to the hospital quickly.
And then here are some of those color triaging pictures. So you can see firefighters are there. There are some individuals, actually on ready to go. There are some individuals who are waiting maybe with family members. So it really was a great way to get everyone triaged into the hospitals and coded correctly in order to save the most lives. And then also here, speaking before about that fire, here is the fire engine fighting the fire that broke out on the aircraft. And then the bottom left-hand picture, a pretty shocking picture of what that inside actually looks like. So thankfully, individuals were able to get off the plane, and otherwise we probably would have had a lot more casualties. And it also just speaks to the efficiency of the triaging process. So had they not been able to get people off and moved and triaged and sent away, there could have been a lot more people closer to this incident. So because they had expedited so well and gotten people to safety, we also didn't see as many casualties.
So really some of the response resources, I wanted to discuss some of those. So 52 ambulances were deployed. There was 4 air ambulances, 2 buses, local buses used to get some of those green category patients to the hospital. The Unified Command Center was open to help coordinate efforts of all those other incident command systems that were open. They sent patients to the 3 trauma hospitals, the 3 San Mateo County hospitals, and then 5 additional hospitals were prepared to receive any additional patients that were needed. So it really spoke to the coordination of getting all those ambulances there and getting them to the appropriate places to save as many lives as possible. So I want to give you a little overview of the area and the victims. So 178 victims were triaged and transported to 9 Bay Area hospitals. The 2 critical patients that arrived via Coast Guard, and then, for instance, Stanford Medical Center received 58 of those injured patients, and then the other hospitals received the rest. So I wanted to show you this little map area and sort of some of the logic behind in this public health and the decisions that they made. So the purple area is San Mateo County, and that area is where the airport is, and then the little brown area above is San Francisco. So they really contained transporting the patients to these 2 counties. And the reason they did that is because they wanted to be able to coordinate the effort really well and speak to reunification. So those hospitals in the area were able to do that. Now the pink area, Santa Clara County, that area was alerted, and their hospitals' incident command centers were also set up in case there were more injuries. But as we saw, there was only 178 victims of the 291. So there was a possibility that we would have to cross over into another county. But since there wasn't as many victims, we were able to control it to 1 county, making the communication easier.
And here you can just see some images of the U.S. Coast Guard where they were actually landing right on the tarmac to get those first 2 critical patients in. And as they found out, the helicopters actually have different landing operations and different landing criteria. And so the hospital quickly figured that out because of great communication, and were able to actually create a landing area for the helicopter outside of their usual landing zone.
So here's sort of setup and the preparedness that was needed. So this, I think, speaks to some resiliency. The hospitals had practiced for mass casualty incidences, and so you see here on in these pictures outside the emergency room a setting up of triage with a lot of gurneys and a tent outside. Then there's this area over here of directing traffic to make sure you could get the flow of the ambulances through. And then, of course, setting up the trauma teams and calling in additional trauma teams. Since at the beginning, you're not aware of what type of injuries you're going to be getting. So all the hospitals in the area, of course, activated their incident command system.
And then some of the roles that we've been talking about are great, and a lot of the roles were played well. This is a slide talking about maybe some of the areas, the public health roles that were not played very well. So we felt that the integration of the medical supply buses was one area that was lacking. These 2 emergency medical buses are actually at the airport, and they never arrived. This would have helped expedite people to the hospitals and just general transportation of so many people. And we also found out that the airport does monthly emergency drills. However, these buses were never included in those drills. So perhaps because they did not practice, they did not execute. Also, no common radio frequency was used during the emergency. This caused a lot of miscommunication and confusion, a lot of buzzing on the frequencies and a lot of talking, a lot of craziness going on. So having a common radio frequency was not used. Also, since this flight originated from South Korea, there were a lot of language and cultural issues, and that role was not played very well. So there were many young and unaccompanied minors specifically with this incident because there was a school educational trip. There were no parents or guardians or responsible parties in general to manage the young children. If they had to go to the hospital and get anything done, there was no one to sign off on their procedures. There was no one really to be watching them and take care of them. I mean, they really were on their own. So the hospitals had to create a separate area to actually corral a lot of these young children in order for the consulate to arrive and figure out what to do from there. So these roles were just, a little bit lacking in our opinion.
So I want to discuss additional roles and responsibilities that we saw also there that were maybe unexpected and different view for public health. So for instance, we saw both the Korean and Chinese consulates that had to be pulled in to be able to talk with these citizens and do the opposite process of notifying family at home, letting them know where they were at, how they were doing. So really a major role in that communication internationally to other countries, so a big role. And then there was the Asiana Airlines. So they, of course, wanted to know instantaneously what happened and investigating and what can we find out and trying to get more information. So a lot of sharing of information back and forth with them. And then the National Transportation Board, of course, airplane accidents, so they, of course, come and want to look at everything. And there's a big responsibility of making sure they have all the parts of the airplane together so they can repiece and put everything back together to try to figure out really what happened to, as we know, the responsibility is to prevent this from happening in the future. So really that safety focus for the future. The big part was San Mateo County, and they had a huge role. This was in their county. They coordinated everything, all the efforts to all the different hospitals, helping to coordinate where patients would go. So they had a very big role. 2 players that it was sort of unexpected. We didn't know that they were going to come, but we have had experience in the past with airlines, New York. So the FBI showed up. Was this a terrorist activity? They came to investigate and learn more information. They wanted names of people on the airplane to be able to look at databases, so needed that additional information. And then U.S. Customs. Of course, none of these people have been through customs. We haven't seen their passports, their visas. So we had members of the U.S. Custom in all the hospitals that were wanting to try to verify who people were. And many people did not have paperwork or passports because it was on the airplane, which there was a fire. So that's another thing of the consulates need to come in and help getting all that paperwork back together to help coordinate that effort. Then the other people we saw were Homeland Security, once again doing a lot of coordination of efforts with resources that were needed. They brought the Coast Guard in to help with flights. They really were a big communication and coordination effort. The other big group was the American Red Cross, and I can't say enough about the American Red Cross. Their big responsibility is family reunification, and they are one agency that we're able to give our patient lists to be able to communicate where and when and how a patient is doing. So we had the American Red Cross there. Then the other larger community public health response were all the activation of the incident command centers. So we saw that on every level, state level, regional level, and county level. The incident command centers were open to have that structure in place and that communication and process. And you really saw great communication, which speaks to that resiliency and getting things done and everything back to normal as possible and being able to respond to everything. Along with that, all the hospitals that responded to this incident opened their incident command centers and were able to function seamlessly with the other agencies. Some public health issues, concerns that came forward with this was air quality. So we had this big fire, and air quality had a notice went out to protect the public health, those people who are asthmatic or have some congestive emphysema or heart failure, things like that that might need additional help. The airport, is right off the 101, which is a very big highway up to San Francisco, so traffic alert. Then there was the mass casualty code that was called to all the hospitals. Another very significant thing for the public health is that no hospitals went on divert, meaning they didn't close their doors to regular everyday occurrences that were happening in the community. So if, for instance, one hospital sees about 150 people a day in their ED, that still happened along with triaging all these people who came in from the airport. And then another significant thing that was set up in the hospital setting was a family branch, which included chaplaincy, social worker, counseling, all those additional services that you might need for family members who've just lost everything and need to, in some way, stabilize and be able to go forward.
And I think, too, back to that, family branch, it's really important to recognize that the emergency preparedness, emergency response is not just a one-day occurrence. Sometimes it really does stretch out over multiple days, weeks, years. And so we definitely need to recognize that these are very important pieces to that recovery and resiliency, and making sure that, grief counseling is very important for those who were lost, and just the things like shelter and food. So making sure that people have what they need after the occurrence. The tarmac could be cleared and everything could be cleaned up, but there's a lot of work still to be done.
I know that many hospitals, so as you saw, many of the injuries were minor. And so discharging them to a hotel or anything like that, like they had nothing planned for any of that. So being able to then set up transportation to a hotel and being able to set something in the area until everything was stabilized was important.
Mm-hmm. So some of the other community resiliencies that were in place that really helped with this process was the San Francisco Air Crisis exercises that the airport does every month. And like we said, they do many different emergencies. They could do terrorism, or they could fires, things like that. They do a different emergency each time. This definitely helped with this response. Also, the annual statewide medical health exercise, which is what they do yearly, and then Urban Shield, which is the fire and police departments that come together and practice different emergencies. So this practice makes perfect models. Definitely what we felt like helped with the response, and definitely lowered the casualties for this incident.
In addition, the county has a Alert 3 system in place where when that's triggered, you automatically have law, fire, and the mass casualties set up, ready to go, and everything is activated quickly. The other big thing that we saw, that community resiliency working together, is that the incident command structure, how it just seemed to work seamlessly across the organization. And one other additional is the training that happens constantly with FEMA, and being able to act through scenarios and to be able to learn and grow and create even better action plans.
So some of the changes that we recommend, or that were already recommended after the incident. Requiring a minimum aircraft fire and rescue staffing level. So one of the reasons why there was such a great response at the scene immediately was that the San Francisco Fire Department actually has a very high staff compared to a lot of other areas. And so what they were able to do was not only help the people outside and contain the fire when it did eventually break out, but also to have a few members of the staff go into the aircraft itself and find that 5 individuals were actually stuck in there and could not get out on their own. So it was just the extra staffing was actually a great asset to have and be able to save those 5 individuals. As you saw, a fire broke out and demolished the inside. So those 5 individuals can thank those extra staff for their lives, most likely. So requiring a minimum staff level is very important. Also, policies for the young and unaccompanied minors in the hospitals, as we spoke about earlier, not having any identification, not having parents to sign off on different procedures is very important. So just policies around that is really, really an interesting thing that came up during this emergency. Knowledge around HIPAA record release expectations. So as we talked about earlier, there is an exception to HIPAA. You don't want to give out anyone's name ever is kind of the thought, and you don't want media to get a hold of it, and you don't want anything to happen or you to be responsible as you are actually, against regulation. So what is allowed is Red Cross is allowed to have those names for reunification, which is very, very important, especially with a lot of these individuals being young and unaccompanied minors. And also to the FBI. The FBI needs to know who these people are. You are allowed to give these records. And some of the hospitals actually did not release it to these places.
Yeah, and it was sort of funny, the FBI actually had to get a subpoena to get some of the records from some of the hospitals, but it's all good. It worked out.
It worked out. But knowledge around HIPAA, I think that's really important with these emergencies, that they are going to be dealing with people wanting to know who these people are and making sure you know who you're supposed to be getting it to. And then also regulations surrounding these international incidences. Since the flight originated in South Korea, we had a lot of people who were rushed to hospitals, and everybody's transported, some of them with and without baggage or identification, no passports, no visas. They didn't go through customs. So having some regulations around what to do and how to deal with this specific situation would have helped. And what we ended up having to do is have customs come to the hospitals and figure out a process from there. But until then, we kind of just kept everyone in an area and tried to figure it out. So there was some chaos in this because of this international, qualities of it.
So the other, some public health issues that came up with this also was the decontamination. So the plane had some material on it that people weren't really sure what it was. And so there wasn't clear on decontamination or not, if a patient was decontaminated. So just an increased training on that. And then this environmental concern with this material on the plane. Really one of the recommendation was not having hazardous material on a passenger airplane. I really agree with that.
Makes sense.
Makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. So that would be another recommendation, a change. And then the other increased public communication, dissemination of knowledge. The incident command centers, those public information officers were able to give out information, but so the airline, people wanted to hear from the airline and additional information, but you can only do so much when you're still investigating. So it's one of that fine line that is hard to determine.
And that's all we have for you for Asiana 214, and we hope you enjoyed it. We look forward to looking at your videos and your feedback. And our references are here. And thank you.